Welcome to our viewers around the world. In this video documentary titled Lost in the Feed, How Social Media Redefines Africa, we explore if social media in Africa is a force for good or digital colonialism. On one hand, it empowers Africans to connect, share their culture, and innovate, providing platforms for activism, education, and entrepreneurship. On the other hand, it often imposes Western ideals, marginalizes local languages, and erodes traditions, while global corporations profit disproportionately from African data. This duality raises critical questions about agency, equity, and the preservation of Africa's cultural identity in the digital age. Can Africa harness social media's potential without succumbing to cultural and economic exploitation?
The learning objectives are on your screen. It explores the shift from traditional to digital media, highlighting the rise of social media platforms, particularly those with over 1 billion monthly users, and the dominance of US-based platforms like Meta in Africa. It examines the impact of social media on African culture, religion, and civil society, addressing both its benefits and risks. Insights include warnings from the US Surgeon General, Australia's regulatory pushback, and the need for African governments to demand more indigenous content. Practical solutions are proposed to mitigate social media's dangers while preserving Africa's cultural identity. Worldwide, and in the last decade, there has been a transition from traditional media such as TV, newspapers, and magazines to a new kind of media that primarily utilizes digital technology and the Internet for dissemination of information. The new digital media that is almost always owned by corporations is called social media. Increasingly, social media is becoming widely accepted as the medium of communication all over the world. Social media has been credited with impacting politics and voting in the United States. The majority of these media companies are located in the United States and China. There are a lot of people on social media. The major social media companies with more than 1 billion users per month are listed on your screen and are Facebook with approximately 3 billion active users, YouTube with approximately 2.5 billion active users, WhatsApp and Instagram with approximately 2 billion active users each, TikTok with approximately 1.5 billion active users, WeChat with approximately 1.3 billion active users, Messenger with approximately 1 billion active users. Of these 7 companies, the top 4 platforms are located in the US: Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, and Instagram. Of these 7 companies, only 2 are Chinese companies, TikTok and WeChat, while the impact of these social media platforms are global. Their impact in Africa is even more pronounced. Our focus is on Africa because of its population of approximately 1.5 billion people, equivalent to approximately 18% of the total world population. It has a young and vibrant young population with a median age of 19 years and huge penetration and commonality of widely spoken languages such as English and French. In Africa, the largest number of users of social media are in northern and southern Africa, with approximately 41% of users each, followed by West Africa with approximately 16% of users. Central and East Africa have approximately 10% of users. In Africa, Facebook dominates the market with 82% of users, followed by TikTok 60%, Instagram 54% and X, formerly known as Twitter, 49%. WhatsApp, owned by Meta, the parent company of Facebook, has a unique place in Africa. It is the platform for use in making free phone calls. According to Statista, approximately 95% of Internet users in South Africa reported using WhatsApp every month. In Nigeria, approximately 92% of Internet users use WhatsApp. In Kenya, approximately 94%, and in Ghana, approximately 90%. Most people in Africa access these platforms with their mobile phone and spend 3 to 6 hours daily on the media platforms. These platforms serve as a means of communication with friends and family. They also use these platforms to gather news about their community and other parts of the world. For some, these platforms have also become a lifeline and a means of employment. There are a lot of entrepreneurs utilizing these platforms for blogs, selling items, and making videos that then become monetized. The positive impact of these platforms to individual purses and the local economy cannot be denied. An unspoken part of the use of these free social media platforms is the private information such as name, location, age, ethnic group, educational status, etc. that the user has to provide to these platforms. In exchange, the platform exposes the consumer to advertisement and marketing of goods and services. These advertisements are sometimes embedded into the services and so cannot be ignored or deleted, as some of them are paid advertisements. Spending 3 to 6 hours per day on these platforms is a lot of time to be exposed to advertisement from the United States, China, and other parts of the world. Over time, without noticing and surreptitiously, one begins to be influenced by what is being advertised and marketed on these platforms. There is no doubt that social media impact the spending practices of consumers. In 2023, in the African Journal of Inter-Multidisciplinary Studies, Entabaki and Buthelezi studied the effect of social media brand engagement on South African consumers' purchase intention in South Africa. The authors concluded that social media is an immensely powerful communication tool that can be used to shape consumers' purchase intentions. Social media influences whatever one consumes on it. The influences are typically related to socio-cultural traits such as clothing and clothing style, music, sexuality, religion, movies, politics, etc. Unfortunately, in most cases this is almost always to the detriment of the local industry and community due to the very low content of indigenous materials on these platforms. There are many positives from social media, some of which we have previously mentioned, such as ready and unfettered access to information without a typical gatekeeper, such as the government, as occurs in many developing countries. The freedom to disseminate information on any topic of one's choice from one's own fingertips to the world. The ability to control, to a reasonable extent, what one consumes on social media. The ability to be anonymous on social media without undue fear of being easily discovered. The decentralization of democracy. The ability to facilitate online learning. Social media has created new avenues for entrepreneurship and economic empowerment all over the world, and more so in Africa. However, there are also many negatives on social media, such as its detrimental effect on local communities by not building social cohesion, promoting isolationism, and the weakening of cultural norms relating to dressing, mannerism, respect for parents and elders in society, etc. Inevitably, the consumer of social media in Africa may begin to make direct and indirect comparisons to the situation in their country and the headquarters of the social media platform, even though the circumstances, pace of development, diversity of the population, ethics and morality may be different. The challenges, the problems, the issues then become more glaring. If adequate care and consideration is not taken, indirectly and through subtle imaging, the unsuspecting consumer begins to question leadership, race, gender, etc. The issue per se is not the questioning of authority or these topics. All these should be challenged and much more. The underbelly is that there may be a hidden agenda that the consumer may not be aware of. A priority in the USA may not be a priority in Kenya, Nigeria, Morocco, South Africa, or any other part of Africa. This, in some instances, may lead to civil unrest and political instability, which may then be further exacerbated by social media. Regarding priorities, a good example is healthcare. We have made a documentary on infant mortality rate in Nigeria. The death of infants, also known as infant mortality in Nigeria, is a bad thing, and every effort ought to be made to reduce the infant mortality rate. In Nigeria, it is 68.54 per 1,000 children that are born alive. In the United States, it is 5.35 per 1,000 children that are born alive. In simple terms, this means that infant mortality rate is approximately 13 times higher in Nigeria than in the United States. The number of infants in Nigeria dying before reaching 1 year of age in Nigeria is too high. Obviously, reducing infant mortality rate must be a top priority in Nigeria. Governments all over the world are beginning to understand the ill effects of social media across all age groups and particularly in children and young adults. Recently, the Surgeon General of the United States, in a New York Times article, decried the ill effects of social media. In June 2024, the U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy penned a strongly worded op-ed in the New York Times calling for social media warning labels. It is time to require a Surgeon General's warning label on social media platforms, stating that social media is associated with significant mental health harms for adolescents, he wrote. Such a warning, he said, would regularly remind parents and adolescents that social media has not been proved safe. The Australian Parliament recently banned social media for people under 16 years of age. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, said, "We know social media is doing social harm. This is a landmark reform. We know some kids will find workarounds, but we're sending a message to social media companies to clean up their act." The government has announced that tech companies have 1 year to stop minors under 16 years of age from logging into their social media platforms or risk up to 50 million Australian dollars or 30 million US dollars in fines. Australia's government has said the social media ban will apply to Facebook, Snapchat, Reddit, Instagram and X. Certain chat-based social media, including Messenger Kids, WhatsApp, Kids Helpline, Google Classroom and YouTube, will not be banned. A decision on other messaging apps, like Signal, Discord and Google Chat, has not yet been made. Meta Platforms, which owns Facebook and Instagram, said the legislation had been rushed. To whose advantage is it then that these countries have this degree of influence in Africa? Certainly not to the advantage of the local countries. The algorithm presented to the consumer likely skews what is presented to advance the culture and attributes of the country that owns the platform. That is, to promote a certain agenda. This should be expected. The platform should advance the interest of the people at headquarters. Period. End of story. Unfortunately, most consumers of the platform do not understand this hidden hand. By the time they realize what is happening, it is almost too late, as the younger generation now thinks and has values that are more in keeping with these foreign companies. This happens all over the world. We can all see it in the kind of music being produced in Africa and other parts of the world. Music that sounds very much like American hip-hop or rap or country. The lyrics are in English and the singers look very much like people who live in the US. Gone are the days of easily locally accessible and widely promoted indigenous African music as occurred during Festac 77 by gifted artists such as Fela Kuti, Sunny Ade, Manu Dibango, Ebenezer Obey, Sunny Okosun, Kulthum, Miriam Makeba, Baba Mal, Osita Osadebe, Yusuf Olatunji, Mbilia Bell, Dan Maraya Jos, Maman Shatta, Salawa Abeni, and so on. Geniuses who elevated African language, culture, and way of life through music. This also impacts the movies we consume in Africa. So what are the African governments doing to protect their culture, language, and way of life? Unfortunately, at this point, nothing. This is sad as it leaves their citizens prone to exploitation and at the mercy of these corporate entities. What's next for the African consumer on these platforms? The first step is recognizing that these platforms are not designed to actively advance your culture or civilization. As you continue to engage and live within these digital ecosystems, they will persistently gather data about you, building detailed profiles aided by AI. Make no mistake, the content and advertisements presented to you will rarely reflect your culture or language. Instead, they will predominantly showcase ideas, products, and values that may feel entirely foreign, further disconnecting you from your roots. Here are the solutions we propose to counteract the dangers of social media in Africa. Number 1. Promotion of indigenous content by encouraging creators to produce content in local languages and celebrate traditional music, art, and customs. Number 2. Encourage digital literacy by educating communities about the impact of social media and how to critically engage with its content. Number 3. Develop policies for cultural preservation by advocating for regulations that protect indigenous cultural expressions online. Number 4. Encourage community platforms by developing African-centric social media platforms that prioritize local languages and cultural promotion. Number 5. Encourage collaboration with tech companies through partnerships to incorporate African languages and heritage into mainstream technology. In summary, the role of social media in shaping narratives is undeniable, but with proactive measures, African culture, religion, music, and language can be preserved and celebrated in the digital age.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This has been a presentation of Apomulero Media LLC. By subscribing, you ensure you don't miss out on our future videos that delve into fascinating topics from around the world.